Welcome to DMCNY's Midweek Recharge. I'm Ginger Conlon, President of DMCNY, and today we're going to discuss Adtech 2023. We're going to take a little bit of a look into the future. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our annual sponsors' generous support is what enables us to have events like this. So thanks so much to our platinum sponsor, Axiom, our gold sponsors, Weiland, Experian, and Alliant, and our bronze sponsors, BMI Global OMS, Japs Olson Company, and Epsilon. Also, a bit of housekeeping. If you have any tech issues, please go ahead and use the chat, and we'll help you out as quickly as we can. If you have any questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A box. We'll take some questions during the presentation. We'll definitely have time for a Q&A at the end as well. So just, pop those questions in whenever they come to mind. So at the end of a tumultuous 2020, we're going to take a vital look forward, not just to 2021, but all the way to 2023. And we have two experts in ad tech with us this evening to take us on that journey. So joining us today are Shailin Dhar, CEO of MMI, and Adam Heimlich, CEO of Chalice. They're going to discuss all of the effects that the recent changes to advertising strategy and technology are going to have on the market and on your business over the next few years. So welcome, Shailin. Welcome, Adam. Thanks so much for being here this evening.
Thank you for having us, Ginger.
All right, well, let's jump in with the first question. So, ad tech is evolving, obviously, and business models are evolving along with it. So what new services and business models are developing that you're seeing that will take hold in 2023, and why those?
Yeah.
So, Adam, you want to kick us off? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest event in the service marketplace over the last couple of years is the success of Mighty Hive, which is kind of a non-agency agency.
Mm-hmm.
They really went to market around in-housing, and the market hasn't really reacted to that yet, right? They did super well, and the big agencies are still mostly afraid of in-housing, but I think we're going to see a lot of rebranding around, if not in-housing itself, around the kind of services that in-housers want, right? That the reasons that Mighty Hive are successful aren't because they're fundamentally different than an agency. It's because by aligning themselves with in-housing, they said, like, we're different and we provide a different set of services, and they made the agency model look antiquated, which it is. So I think we're going to see a lot more activity in the service market, and big agencies finally starting to respond to this with something that's closer to the quote unquote in-house model.
Right, interesting. Shailin?
In terms of new services or just business models, I think less CPM is where I hope things are headed. Part of that is, it's not unreasonable to bill things on a CPM unit basis, but having everything as a CPM that comes out of media budget and kind of makes it very difficult for marketers to separate, this is my media cost, and then this is my data provider costs, and these are my verification costs, and here's my any other technology costs. That is what I hope changes, and we're already seeing a push towards that already. But yeah, less CPM and more SaaS billing is what I hope for, and I think we see that trend already happening, because we've been talking about transparency for a long time across this industry, and I think it just starts with being able to isolate your costs for various things separated from the actual media cost that goes to publishers.
Right.
It's a good point about SaaS. If I can chime in. I think businesses, the clients of agencies, they've adopted a lot of SaaS, right? They use Slack, they probably use SaaS-based accounting software and travel software, Concur. So I think that's what they start to look for that in agency services. I think that's part of what Mighty Hive hit on is the cost model. SaaS has changed the way businesses view the cost model. They expect to have very advanced capabilities that could just be flipped on for a subscription fee, right? And then from there they pay for what they use, right? Can grow with the service. And that's not an AOR contract at all. It's certainly not a trading desk type deal, right? It's extremely different.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of the default practice to just say, okay, put it on a CPM, because it makes it easier for us to manage. Things like dynamic creative optimization don't need to be on a CPM basis. They don't apply to every impression. And so, those types of things, I think marketers just need to be more conscious of what is the long-term value of this specific technology, and does it need to be part of my media spend specifically, or can it be isolated as a specific, technology or service that I'm buying for very specific purpose. CPM doesn't apply to everything. Verification and measurement, I think, does, but things like dynamic creative optimization, I don't mean to pick on them for any reason. It doesn't apply to every impression, and therefore I think marketers should stay away from just billing it on a CPM on every single transaction that occurs.
So now
suppression audiences. Sorry, suppression audience, charging for every impression for suppressing an audience that one kills me. That one kills me. You didn't do anything. You just sent me the audience.
Yeah, that's crazy. So now what should marketers expect? Because it sounds simplified in one way, but more complicated in another way, because you've got to figure out different kinds of spend and where to kind of bucket what should be in what budget. Or, I mean, I guess you have to do that now, but it sounds like that needs to evolve.
Right. Yeah. I think as Chalice, we try to be a service provider that keeps it easy, right? We know that the agency model isn't ideal, has a lot of extra costs and inefficiencies, and certainly a lot of antiquated process. But what clients like about it is the ease of saying, my agency takes care of all of that. So I think what you'll see in the service market, at least the way Chalice thinks about it, is really bundling a lot of SaaS services and pure services, consulting services in a SaaS-like fee. So you can say, like, this is what you get. With Chalice, you get a custom algorithm. There's a lot that goes into that, and we can expose all the costs of the different things that go into it. But basically, you're subscribing to a custom algorithm. And I think that's what I mean when I say like an in-house type solution, is you can say, oh, you have an in-house team, you probably need a solution for dynamic creative or something like that, and charge it on a subscription fee.
Right.
So it's
and I think vendors are moving in that same direction, especially given the dynamics of this year and how ad budgets fluctuated depending on what industry the advertiser operated in, and their just kind of external constraints around spending. I think vendors are also realizing that tying everything to media spend is probably not good for them, every single year. And just having that predictable cost, it makes it easier to manage a business from the vendor side, and it also just makes it cleaner for the client side to just have a clear expectation on what this specific addition costs me, and then I can determine, as a client, what value it delivers to my organization.
Right. And Adam, what else were you saying before?
That the service market hasn't yet realigned around solutions, really, right? I think that's what the emerging service market will be. Is like, now it's really complicated because you have to tie together a whole bunch of different agency-like and vendor-like entities to get the solution you want. But I think the opportunity in the vendor market, I think Method and Chalice both fall under, is wrapping up a bunch of solutions, wrapping up a bunch of capabilities as a solution packaged for clients. Like, we take care of X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Do either of you see paying on performance fitting in anywhere in this, or is it just not really a fit in this scenario?
I think it depends on what you're offering as a technology provider. I don't think measurement companies or verification companies should be particularly tied to performance. I don't know how Adam feels about it from the algorithm side, but you know, measurement and verification is supposed to tell you just what is, and you know, our main focus is identifying non-working media, not here's where you should optimize and here's how this gets better. It's like, here's the garbage, please remove that. And just making that as clear as possible is our mandate. So I think more things can be tied to performance, but definitely not everything. Performance is hard enough to assess in the digital world already. It's tying every technology provider to performance that is kind of just imaginary right now. Doesn't sound too sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, not surprising based on the name of the organization, DMCNY's members are pretty data driven, right? So of course, they're all about the data. So how do you envision marketers using advertising data differently in 2023 than they might be doing today?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the answer is that it's easier than before to get the benefits of dealing in raw data, right? Of working with all your data, to stop aggregating. Like just to take one example, the Snowflake data warehouse, they had a very successful IPO a few months ago. Like, you know, we're finding customers popping up all over the place who are using Snowflake, and we use Snowflake. And compared to just 2 or 3 years ago, data warehousing was this huge project that they've completely obliterated the costs and the pain of data warehousing. And I think that's all exciting, but what it means is you could work in your raw data, you could work in your log files, you don't have to aggregate things, you could do analysis on the real data. So Chalice really pivots off that opportunity and saying your advertising data is could be fuel for your own algorithms, right? And it's not so difficult or expensive as it was 3 years ago to do that. And I think that has ripple effects, certainly across Shailin's business, but many others as well. Is say you don't need aggregated data, you don't need it to be behind a fence or in a walled garden. You could take your raw data, put it in Snowflake or some other SaaS-based data warehouse, and do all kinds of things with it that are going to provide your company extra value.
I agree. I think for data-driven marketers, you know, one is just having the data. I think the first step would be just getting comfortable with having more data and holding it is the first step. The clarification that we find ourselves making a lot of the time when talking to clients is we're not talking about user data. We're talking about transaction data. And so get over that discomfort of, well, data means something sensitive and privacy invasive. No, we're just talking about transaction data. And when it comes to, let's say, you know, scoping a log file request from a demand side platform, we're talking about 8 to 10 columns. And the rest of that is all just, you know, this audience information that was used for targeting and delivery and all of that. But, you know, focusing on what was the unique identifier for this transaction, where did the ad serve, who was it served through, and what did it cost me? And then having quality metrics alongside is kind of the key starting point. And given the, you know, there was a ISPA PwC report from the UK Advertisers Association that came out in May of 2020, you know, highlighting all these concerns about cost transparency and all that. For us and our clients, it really starts with knowing, you know, what is your billable event? Are you being billed on how many auctions you won? Or are you being billed on the number of creatives that downloaded to web property? Or are you being billed on actual ad impressions that were rendered on an app or a web page or you know, television app? That's kind of the starting point is, you know, okay, you see these impression counts, but that's not an ad impression. That's just auctions that you won, opportunities that you won to serve an ad. And we see that discrepancy between auctions won and ad served averaging out at 15%. So, you know, it just starts there by knowing what you're being billed on.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It's awesome, and it's so much more to think about when you're when you've got to say, okay, well, like you said, we're not always just talking about customer data. There's all kinds of other data that you can benefit from when you, think about it differently and use that data. So can you talk a little bit about what some of the benefits that marketers will start to see as they take more advantage of using data that's not just in their customer files?
Yeah, I can just take off from what Shailin was saying. Like, it's first step is like getting the data, right? Getting your hands on it and seeing what it shows and doesn't show. And then I would come in, the step after that is what does it predict and not predict, right? So in staying on the topic of demand side platforms, you can get a lot of mileage out of supply side modeling, right? So to take example, like if you start to predict when you're going to win an auction and not serve an ad, there's a problem with that supply connection, right? So bidding less or cutting it out, and then just so on from there, right? There's a higher likelihood of a viewable impression, higher likely of a more duration in view. All these things could be adjusted for cost, right? So it's way too much for any human being to handle, but it's great for machine learning to handle, right? To say bid according to these factors, remodel as necessary to keep it tuned, and that gets you much better results, right? It cost $100 million 4 years ago. It costs well under $1 million today.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like as a marketer, you're getting much more kind of efficient and effective results for your investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes we compare it to supply chain optimization, right? If it's complicated enough, then there's ROI just in a project to take a good look at it and fix what's wrong, right? Like it's, if you already know it's not perfect, then there's probably ROI in making it better.
Yeah, I think having a clear definition of what supply path optimization means for your organization is important. We see a lot of.
I was talking about physical supply chains as a metaphor.
Oh no, I know what you're saying. Okay. I completely agree. It's the comfort level of, oh, well, I'm a marketer, what am I going to do with these log files? Like, what do you do with the receipts that any of your employees submit for their expenses, right? It's like, you're not sending the box of receipts up to the CEO to like sift through one at a time. It's to make sure that there's accountability. And that's where you just need to start, right? We always explain to clients, we're not asking you to start looking through log files yourself. Like, we're not sending log files to your CMO or, head brand manager to like do this investigative work. It's, you have the receipts available so that you can look back, not just for the kind of shorter term optimizations in what you're buying, but also your long-term media planning. Because if you're planning your media by quarter or on an annual basis, and you don't have receipts that also go back the same time period in history, then I don't really know how you're operating strategically. So, for us, that was a realization that we had last year, and we increased our data retention from 60 days to indefinite, just to make sure that our clients, if they were doing annual media plans, could look back at the last year and say, okay, I'm negotiating this insertion order with this publisher. We agreed on a 70% viewability threshold, a 3% IVT threshold for bot traffic. Did we meet that? Rather than looking at 52 weekly aggregate reports and kind of trying to tally that up, actually having that 365 days of data and being like, okay, well, now I can hold you accountable based on the raw data. And it's not like I had to look at this every day for the last year. It's just when it came time for negotiations, I go back and have that information available.
Yeah, that's excellent. So, there are a lot of, you mentioned transparency earlier, talking about the isolated costs, and clearly there's a lot of myths about transparency, not just now, but what might happen in the future as things evolve. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and hearing and how you expect that to look in 2023 in terms of, the transparency related myths and what the reality is?
Yeah.
Adam, you want to take that?
Yeah, one? I mean, I had the first big agency trading desk that was fully transparent, and we really went to market with our clients about We'll tell you what you charge. We'll let you look at the raw data. We'll tell you what we charge you, count all costs. And it was a lot less powerful than you'd think, given all the clamoring about transparency. So I think I've learned from that experience. This is kind of a buzzword that means different things to different people. And I think a lot of the complaining about transparency really just speaks to a crisis of trust. Right. And like people, I found I was an agency trading desk guy. I wasn't trusted no matter how much transparency I was going to bring. So I kind of pivot these conversations around transparency to the one that we've had here. Like the transparency issue is, do you have your data or not? And how, can you look at it or not? Right. Because there's too much data. And if someone calls for transparency, then they say, I want to see my data. Then they realize it's way too much data to look at. Then they need a solution to how to look at it and get. And right, so that's where the productive transparency conversation goes. The unproductive transparency conversation, I guess, will go on. People like bundled offerings, right? And they don't necessarily like, I'll never know how much Amazon makes off me with Amazon Prime. I'm sure it's profitable, but I like just paying that annual fee and getting free shipping, right? So that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the two myths that I see kind of like in our face most frequently are, one, that somehow the data is not already in existence. It's just about having ownership and access of the data. And then the second thing is, and this is, I don't know really how to solve this, but this kind of narrative that transparency will only come from this like cross-industry, everybody holding hands, collaboration, and we all agree that, consumers and advertisers are the top priority, and we as an industry must just, hold them in high regard. Transparency is, in a supply chain especially, is about just holding accountable the people that you do business with. And so, for an advertiser, like this craziness that we've heard most of this year that, advertisers need to get SSP logs and SSP data. It's like, that's 4 layers of separation away from you. Like, let's just start with your agency and your DSPs and make sure you have the data there. The DSPs will hold accountable the SSPs because that's who they do business with. But this notion that transparency only comes when everybody comes together and just like puts all their cards on the table is, I think, complete myth and fallacy. And I think it's, we take pride in making sure that we empower our clients, the marketers, to get transparency from the companies that they're writing checks to on a monthly basis. And that's where you start.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Adam, ad server data is a great place to start.
Yeah, can you pull a report first? Sorry, I've had child invasion. It's being taken care of.
No problem. Child invasions are always entertaining, so we're all good. Well, I have a couple more questions for you, but we have a couple of questions from our audience, so I want to pause and take those. This was a good one. Peter asks, what are the new job titles that you're creating, and what kind of skills do young people need to thrive in ad tech?
You first. You're bigger.
Type of job titles.
Or maybe roles.
My company is like 6 people.
Well, ours is 10 and going on to 18, but so not too big. But I think that I don't know how to answer the titles question, but I can talk about the skills that I would recommend people have. I think I hate to use this cliche, but getting comfortable with big data, I think, is a good skill set to have. And I think the skill is less in actually being able to slice and dice the data, because there's so many programs that kind of just make it very easy, but getting comfortable with the concept of working with a data set that is, 35 columns and 10 billion rows. It's just, getting comfortable with the context in which that data is from is kind of the starting point. And not shying away from the surface level complexity, I think is what I would recommend to people. I think that's what deters a lot of people, both young entrants into the industry, as well as people with 2 decades of experience from really getting their hands dirty, is, well, this is kind of this endless pit of complexity. It's really not. You get to focus your analysis on the data points that are important for your organization, and I don't think you need to go beyond that.
So what can help you prepare for that? Is it understanding what kinds of questions to ask, or what kinds of like starting with the end in mind kind of a thing? Like, what can help you actually become comfortable?
I think that's the right way to say it, is starting with the end in mind. Is what are you trying to do? Are you trying to optimize and find more efficient supply paths? Because that's a whole different approach to the data analysis. Are you trying to identify non-working media, which is what we do majority of the time? That's a completely different approach, right? So we're very easily starting off with what impressions were completely not viewable, what impressions didn't actually render, so the discrepancy between the DSP count and the ad server count, and which auction IDs are missing, and then going into IVT, non-viewable, and then just any sort of errors that happen in the ad serving process. So it gets far less overwhelming when you know that, okay, I just need to identify these things, knowing that this data set is 30 columns and 8 billion rows. I know I'm just looking for these things, so it's not overwhelming as much.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. And I would think you could kind of summarize the task is to try to work with independent ad tech, right? Try to take jobs where you're going to have a chance to work with independent ad tech, because a lot of digital marketing jobs are just working in the consoles of Facebook and Google, maybe now Amazon. And that's, people who did that for their jobs have had a great ride, and now they're in management positions in a lot of places, but that's not marketing. And I don't think it has a great future, right? I think it will decline in favor of jobs that do involve really large data sets. And I think the thing I would add that I think becomes more important to the job are classic marketing skills, like understanding why certain creative is effective and why brands do what they do with their strategies and their messages, and the way the creative is crafted. I think will become, or already starting to become, increasingly valuable in ad tech strategies, for the reasons it kind of takes too long to explain. But in a nutshell, is once you start trying to drive incrementality, once you're looking at incremental conversions, it hits right back to the classic marketing positions, like how does this ad move people? Who does it move, and how much do they move?
Right. Is like media mix modeling still important? More important?
I think it depends on who you ask. I think there's media mix modeling of, is it broadcast television? Is it print? Is it digital? And then there's all types of mixed channels and mediums just within digital itself. So yeah, I think it's still important, but maybe not in the traditional sense.
Yeah. If you're an analyst, then it could be it's a field. Media mix modeling, causal inference, certainly has a future. But I would say for a regular, if you're not an analytics person, concentrate on ad effectiveness, right? And media mix modeling is one of many measures of ad effectiveness, and you should learn how it creates, how it measures effectiveness, how it works, and how it compares to other ways of measuring ad effectiveness. I think that's the golden road for the strategist.
All right,
I do want to create some new titles. I feel bad not answering that. Chef. In France, they call digital marketers chefs. I kind of want to bring that back.
I think media mixers.
Mixers. Something about orchestration.
Mixology. Media mixology.
There you go. Something with a barista, but with like marketing narista. No, it's awful.
Yeah. Just get out of the console. Talk to people. The ad business is full of people.
Yeah. Great. So, all right. So we have a question from chat. I'm just going to read it. It's a little bit long, so roll with me here. In what direction is the ad tech, quote, tax going? And how can we keep things outside walled gardens effectively for targeting, attribution, and related metrics?
Which way? I'm not a big I'm not a big tax guy. Like, to me, the question is whether the costs are offset by performance. Like, that's where to focus, right? They might be significant, but if they're worth the improvement in performance, or they're just convenient for you, then they're worth it. Like, you could certainly get working media up above 90% and have a horrible campaign, and you could have it much lower and have a good campaign. So I think, getting extraneous costs out is of course always a worthy endeavor. What was the second part again?
How can we keep things outside the walled gardens effectively for targeting, attribution?
Yeah, you should just pilot. Yeah, you should have at least one independent platform in the stack, and pilot the others and try things. Like, I've never seen more reluctance to try things in the market than right now. It's like marketers are like, it's like trying to talk to 70-year-olds to talk to your average 30-year-old marketer about trying a new platform or testing something. And people circle the wagons during tough times, and I understand that, but it's going to be 2021 soon. It's going to be spring. This pandemic's going to end. Like, you have to test. Like, marketers have to be testing, and a lot has happened in technology. So, this idea of, oh, we work with Google and Facebook and we tested a DSP once, like, those are going to be losers in the marketplace, because the ones that are testing and learning new ad tech and the tricks that it can do are making progress, right? People have made progress in 2020, and those who haven't are going to have to catch up.
Yeah, I think it's important to know kind of where your diminishing returns start from your Google and Facebook spend. Depending on the advertiser, there's only so many people you want to reach in every specific place. And I think a lot of that hesitation starts with being able to confidently enforce frequency caps in wherever you're buying. That's still difficult, whether you're operating on the open web or buying within a walled garden. With the walled garden specifically, I think the question was kind of hinting at how do you keep them honest? I mean, start by taking your account rep to task. It's, nobody takes it personally. You're going to be 20 minutes out of their day. You're going to be asking them hard questions. They're going to have a responsibility to pass those questions on internally. And then you get to see what answers they come back with. I mean, again, it starts with just getting comfortable that it's not only you that doesn't have the answers to these questions, because that's where we observe a lot of hesitation. Is like, well, I don't want to look stupid asking, whether in-app is counted on begin to render, or, mobile web is counted on, when the creative downloads, and like, oh, I don't really know what if I want to ask it. Why not? Right? Like, these people are paid to answer your questions. Ask them all the questions that you want. I think that's really the only starting point for holding walled gardens accountable. Is not everybody, the people that you're talking to are not the executives of Google and Facebook. Make them do their jobs. They are compensated very well, and you should make them earn their paychecks. Make them answer your questions.
Yeah.
Nothing will make them listen as much as breaking out $100,000 for an independent ad tech test.
Yeah.
I think that goes completely in conjunction with it. I think we've observed the same thing, that the marketers that are constantly testing out new things, and they know that 1 out of 3 things that they test are complete flops, but you have to do it anyways. It's that fear of something not working out shouldn't stop you from, because we've seen very innovative, great technologies kind of just fall by the wayside because people didn't want to test it. It's like, oh, well, I don't really know. Does it fit in with Google? Oh, you can go into YouTube, then all right, forget it. It's like, there's 80 other places you should be testing these things.
That's what's so perverse about the transparency conversation, is like they trust that none of their YouTube or Facebook money is wasted because there's no transparency. It's like, you definitely have an extra, you could definitely break off 10% of your budget to test something, because there's definitely waste in YouTube and Facebook, and you think there's not because you don't have your data. That's a big mistake.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Well, so the things that the two of you are saying are really making me think way back to the days of, well, no one ever got fired for buying an IBM, right? And not wanting to do something different than they're already doing. But yeah, you're right about testing, and some of the greatest marketers I know, like they have a testing budget. It's it's part of the way they operate, right? So yeah, it's so important.
It brings back to mind the question of skills. Like, I was thinking back to, like, it's not as bad. It's even worse than like no one gets fired for hiring IBM. Like, there's entire organizations where no one can place a tag or traffic a creative because the platforms do all that work and have made it so easy, and no one knows. And there's entire organizations, even agencies, where no one actually knows how this basic ad tech technology works. And when I started in the industry, those things were sort of hacked together, and you had to practically code to be able to traffic a piece of creative. So I was fortunate to be trained at that period where it was necessary to learn how the tech works. But it's really important advice for young people is, like, it's going to be different in different ad tech in a really good way, but you have to actually know how this stuff works, and that pain is good pain for the industry, right? And the organizations that have people who know how this stuff actually works have a huge advantage.
Yeah, I can imagine. So speaking of questions, Shailin, you mentioned before about asking questions. What are some of the questions that marketers should be asking now to prepare, not just for 2021, but for 2023 and beyond?
I don't want to repeat myself, but it really just starts with, what event am I being billed on? There's so much waste that happens just right there. And none of the ad tech supply chain is going to fix the lower level problems if they don't even have to address the fact that you get to bill marketers for every auction that you win and have no responsibility for actually ensuring ad delivery. It's not, again, it sounds complicated. Oh, what's my billable event? How do I track that? Take your DSP count for last month, compare it to your ad server count for last month. Let's just start there. And if that discrepancy is anywhere around 10% or higher, you should probably look into that. If you're winning 100 opportunities to serve an ad and your ad server says, I serve 90 ads, let's figure out how to stop paying for that 10%. Getting marketers to a place where they know what, and the MRC, the Media Ratings Council, is always updating the standards around, how do we define an ad impression? Because there's so many events between a page load happening or, an app being opened, and then the, bid request being sent out, the auction happening, the auction completing, the ad server being requested, the creative downloading, the creative beginning to render, and then fully rendering. It's not just an ad impression is an ad impression is an ad impression. They're all, everybody's counts are different. And that's why we have an IAB standard that, we just accept 10% discrepancies between parts of the supply chain, because, it's, there's a quote from Rocket Fuel had its own kind of trajectory, but the founder of Rocket Fuel said that, people compare ad impressions or programmatic trading to the stock market, but, it's ad impressions are actually like snowflakes, that each one is unique and then they melt, they just disappear. So, it's not like they stay around forever, and it's important to make sure you're capturing the value in that short time that they actually exist.
Oh, that's a good quote.
Yeah. Adam, any questions that you see that marketers should be asking now to be prepared for the future?
I brought a Bill Gates quote. He said, we always tend to overestimate the amount of change in the next 2 years and underestimate the amount of change in the next 10 years. And I think that really applies with machine learning. Like, there are a few advertisers who've applied custom machine learning to their advertising and tied it to their products, like Netflix and Uber being really the first two. And it's all possible for any advertiser to do with no R&D costs. But sometimes I get excited and think there's going to be a flood, but it's more likely this is going to be trickling into the marketplace in places, right? And it'll be concentrated first where there's data science, and maybe some other places where people know about it or where Chalice helps people. But what that slowness just should mean to the audience is that it's opportunity. It means you could run way ahead of the pack. This is something everyone's going to do eventually over 10 years. But if you could do it this year or next year, you might have, right? And those of us who remember like early adopting search or early adopting social, there really was a year or two where you could sort of mint money because the crowd hadn't showed up yet. That's what I really think custom algorithm is like right now, and you can run ahead.
Absolutely. So, any final advice for marketers on what they should be thinking about with the future of ad tech?
Test, scrutinize, get your data. Yep. Just reiterate. It's been great doing this with you, Shailin. We agree on a lot.
Yeah, we do. I think the advice that I think I've suggested this as the primary advice for a few years now is don't get scared by the appearance of complexity.
Right.
It's really not that complicated. The mapping out of how these systems connect is where you need to have your understanding as a marketer. You don't need to know the bid mechanics of this DSP with this specific SSP and what signals are they passing for won bids versus lost bids. You don't need to get into all that. That's dirty work that kind of the plumbers like me and Adam have to concern ourselves with. As a marketer, you really just need to know, okay, here's the technology I'm using for ad serving. It connects to these 3, 4, 10 buying technologies, and here's how each one differs. And if they all differ a lot, then maybe I don't need 40 of them. Maybe I just want to have 6. They're all accessing the same supply pool. So maybe I can get comfortable with the idea that I'm not missing opportunities by only using 6 buying platforms. If they're all connected to the same supply pools, then there's really not any sort of strategic advantage or efficiency advantage that I get from having 35 different buying platforms, because all these salespeople came to my office and did such a good job with their presentation that I now feel obligated to, put some budget through there. So don't run away from the complexity or the appearance of it just because it's not that complicated. And the deep kind of plumbing dirt doesn't concern marketers. That's what they hold other people accountable for, to make sure those pipes do what they're supposed to.
Absolutely. Make
a tag on to that, like the tools that help you make sense of big data sets are just software, right? Like these enormous data sets, like a lot of the comfort with Google and Facebook is again that them having the tools to make sense of big data behind a curtain, so you feel like they're wizards or something. But Amazon has SageMaker and Amazon Web Services, and there's Apache ML and Spark clusters you could light up to do huge amounts of data processing on a personal credit card. In my case, these tools are nothing to be afraid of, right? These are the tools for handling big data and making sense of it for business. And you should just get comfortable with them, right? Because the alternative to getting comfortable with them is to always outsource the processing of big data. People are marking it up at an enormous amount, right? So if you're concerned about ad tech tax and working media, right, learning to process big data yourself is job one. And the tool set is not scary. It's a bunch of SaaS.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, that was excellent. Thank you both so much for all the great information. I know I learned a lot today. So,
thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
great questions.
Shailin and Adam. Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank everyone for attending and remind you all that that the Bruce Beagle's annual Outlook is coming up in mid-January, and registration will open for that next week. And then we've got a whole outline of 2021 events on the site, so check that out. And thanks again for all being here, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Good night. Happy Hanukkah.